Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world. Today is March 5th, and boy, do I have an amazing podcast presentation for you today. Today, we have the acclaimed Bill Holter to speak with us, and we are going to talk everything precious metals. So, what a blessing to have you here today. God bless you, Bill, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Bo. And excuse my voice. I'm getting laryngitis. Haven't had it in 4 or 5 years, but my voice is starting to. Hopefully, we can make it through the whole thing.
All right. Well, we'll do our best. And again, thank you so much for being here. So, everybody who's followed you, I've learned of you through Greg Hunter, USA Watchdog, and I've listened to you for years. And what a knowledgeable source you are with regards to gold and silver. So, I wanted to talk specifically about precious metals because, from a biblical perspective, when we read Haggai 2, verse 8, it says very clearly, the silver and the gold are mine, saith the Lord. The Bible doesn't say the Federal Reserve note is mine, saith the Lord. It says gold and silver are the Lord's. And so what we've seen happen, I'll kind of preface this whole thing, but what we've seen happen from my calculations, what I've seen happen is we had Nixon, and you can confirm all this, but in 71, Nixon took us off the gold standard temporarily. Okay. 50 years later, we're still off the gold standard. Then we had in June of 74, you had Kissinger show up and they were working on a plan with the Saudis. And then in June of 74, they signed what's called today the petrodollar contract. So now this June would actually make 50 years of that contract. It's interesting that, from a biblical perspective, there's that Leviticus cycle of time, 50 years, from when Nixon created this whole mess of the petrodollar contract. He ends up dying on the 50-year mark. So in my calculations, and you were saying pre-podcast that we've as a world have hit what's called a wall of calculations, like you can't go any further. So we can talk about that. But from a biblical perspective, I'm full agreement because from a biblical perspective, when you run Leviticus, any way you do the math right now, you can't stretch it any more past now, this year, next few months. So something's about to break. Take it from here.
I would add to that from a biblical standpoint, the Bible talks about honest weights and measures. And you can weigh and you can measure gold. You can weigh and measure silver. Those are real monies. And we got to a point where we've become backwards, where gold and silver are measured by the media, by Wall Street. They're measured in dollars, they're measured in euros, they're measured in yen. And that's really the reverse of what it should be. The reality is an ounce of gold 100 years ago is still that same ounce of gold today. It hasn't changed, it hasn't grown, it hasn't shrunk. What has changed are the currencies that are issued by different governments. And as I said, it's backwards that gold and silver are measured by the currencies, when in fact, the reality is the currencies are measured by the metal. And I mean, when you see gold, like yesterday, for example, gold was up, 30 some odd dollars. Gold wasn't up, it was the dollar that was down. I think it's important that people understand the measurement of the metals.
Fully agreed. And also you want to take it one step further is these people who they operate in the shadows. They have an unlimited money supply, and that was stated by JFK, which is the truth. Why do they do that? Well, how can they do it? Because they can create money out of thin air. And so they operate in the shadows, but they operate under an illusion. You see, why it's a mystery is because they're in the shadows operating with an illusion, a perception, an illusion. Like when they make movies in Hollywood, they have what's called a facade. You think they're buildings, but it's just a wall. And so these are facades that they set up. They have unlimited funds to control unlimited media, to have a very big voice. And so they use the big media, the big voice with unlimited money to perpetuate a lie that the money, the dollar, the federal, which is not federal, the reserve, which is not, there's no reserves, and the note means it's paper, is actually money. But like you've said, right? What's happened is we went from an honest money ledger because God gave the world honest money. He gave us gold and silver. Why is it honest? Because you have to work for it. You have to mine it. You have to clean it up. You got to perfect it. You have to go through all this work just to create an ounce of gold. Whereas the financial system, which is a fiat money system, all it is it's backed right now. The world believes it's backed by the petro in the of Saudis, but those, and we can talk about this further. But at the same time, too, the Saudis, who are making up the petro portion of the dollar, have joined who? The BRICS. So
Right.
we're living in a world of smoke and mirrors.
Right. A couple things. Um, when, and I'm sure you get asked the same question. You know, how high is gold going to go? How high is silver going to go? And my constant answer is anybody who gives you a price is making it up because we really don't have the numerator or the denominator to do the math on that. When I say numerator and denominator, we don't know what the money supply ultimately is going to be. We don't know what the total debt is going to be. And we're told that the US has 8,300 tons of gold, but it's not been audited since 1956. So if you don't know how much money and how much debt is outstanding versus you don't know how much gold the US actually has, then how can you do a calculation on the gold price? Now, as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, I guess it was about 2 years ago, they came out and they said, uh, we will accept other currencies than dollars. And when I first saw that, I'm like, okay, this is it. It's game on. The reason being, in the past, they would only accept dollars. Now they're accepting other foreign currencies. And then last year, late in the year, the United Arab Emirates came out and they said, we will accept many currencies for oil, but we will not accept dollars. And that is, that's huge. That is, can you imagine that? Even 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine it. Can you imagine it 10 or 20 or 30 years ago? What that says to me is that these producers are no longer viewing the U.S./U.S. military with fear. They believe, they can side with Russia, they can side with China, and they've got protection. It's go back to grade school with bullies. Um, Basically, they feel secure enough to tell the bully no. And it's the beginning of or not the beginning, but we're well into it, the unraveling of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And once the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, the living standard, not just in the US, but the West altogether, is going to absolutely collapse. I mean, think about these central banks that hold 50, 60, 70% or even more of their reserves in dollars. That's going to become a smoking black hole of default, if you will. Their balance sheets are going to implode.
You hit three really important points. Well, many important points, but three that I want to address. First off, you said the word only, and that's exactly right. The contract was very specific with the Saudi petrodollar contract was the United States would give military protection to the Saudis, but their other side of the agreement was they would only sell the dollar in US denominated bonds. Now that's critical because look at how this all played out from a biblical perspective on timing, Bill. You see, Nixon took us off the gold standard on August 15th of 71, 50 years to the exact day Kabul fell. They left those billions of dollars of military equipment in Kabul. That was on the exact day, August 15th, 2021. Now, this is interesting because 9 days later, remember, Kabul was Saudi's neighbor. What do? Saudi signed a military agreement with Russia 9 days later after the fall of Kabul. And why would they do that? Well, because I would agree with what you just said. The United States, the Saudis were now afraid of the government of the United States that they would not protect them. That is the reason, the only reason that I could foresee. And I'm not sure, see what your perspective is, but why would you, as Saudis, why would the Saudis need another military agreement if they've got a military agreement with the world superpower? But yet they were threatened because they believe that that contract is not going to hold. They would be abandoned just like Kabul was. And for the reason that they felt that they could be abandoned like Kabul, they turn around 9 days later, sign a military agreement with Russia. That was the linchpin from what I'm looking at that started all of this. And again, why? How wild is it? It's on a 50-year cycle. You also referenced the word bully. You're 100% right, because the bully would be the guy with the most muscle and the most firepower, right? Well, they're obviously not afraid of the bully anymore because look who's in power. You see, so everything you're saying is dead, is spot on. And then the last point you brought up, or you made a reference to, was how high would gold go? Well, expand upon this, because from my calculations and my understanding, it was in 1980 when we saw gold spike up to $850 an ounce. And at that moment in time, what happened was, because it spiked up to $850 an ounce, what it did was it met the money supply. So the money supply that was created, gold went up high enough that it went 1-to-1. So gold and the money supply went 1-to-1, and the magic number at the time was $850. But expand upon this, because you said we don't know the money supply. They've hidden as an M3 or M1, so we don't know the money supply anymore. So how do you do a calculation? You don't know the numerator, you don't know the denominator, you don't know what numbers you plug into the equation. And so all I know, and think about this and then go from here. So, but I know one thing is that in the 70s, when all of this was going down, there was barely I don't think there was $1 billion. So if you and I wanted to count to 1 million, it would take 12 days not sleeping. But I do know right now we're in the quadrillions. And so if you had to count to a quadrillion, and we're in several quadrillion now, from expand upon that. But from what I want to say, if you want to count to a quadrillion, it would take you 31 million years. So talk about money supply. You're right. What could gold go to? Who knows? But it would be huge.
Yeah, on the first part, the Saudis looked at it as a weakness on the part of the U.S. So if you've sided with someone, and that someone no longer is the baddest man in town, you switch alliances, allegiances, and that's what they've done. As far as back in 1980, actually in 1980, what happened was gold went to 850, and what it did was it balanced the books, not versus money supply, but versus the U.S. debt outstanding. So, and as you know, Jim did that calculation back in the early 70s, and that's what the allure was for him to do what he did, leading up to 1980. And when we got to, to his credit, when we got to the 850, 875 an ounce, he basically sold everything out because the books, according to his math, were balanced. And I mean, if you did that calculation now based on the debt outstanding, you're over 125,000 an ounce, and that's just the on-books debt. That does not include loan guarantees, et cetera, meaning it doesn't include Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, it doesn't include Medicare, Medicaid, it doesn't include any of the other guarantees that the government has put forth. So just based on the 34 trillion, and assuming that there is truly 8,300 tons of gold, which again has not been audited since I believe 1956, you come up with a number of $125,000 an ounce. Um, so where can gold go? Where gold where it will ultimately go will be the inverse, obviously, of the dollar itself. And the dollar itself, when all is said and done, will go to zero, which will make not just an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, but a cup of coffee or a Big Mac or whatever. It will make it unattainable. In other words, it'll go no offer. In other words, you could have as many dollars as you want, but they won't spend. And the example of that, if you go back to Weimar Germany, I forget what the number was. I know in 1917, an ounce of gold cost 170 Reichmarks. And by 1923, it was in the low trillions, I think 3.7 trillion or something like that for an ounce of gold. And then they went to the Rentenmark. And, silver, they did keep the, I think, 16-to-1 ratio. Basically, no matter, it got to the point where gold, silver, services, any type of goods were no longer offered for the currency. And that's why they had to abandon the currency and come up with a Rentenmark, which, there's further history on that, but that's going way out in the weeds.
What Bill's describing here is what's called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation of a money is when, in a window of time, say in a short window, say it's 24 to 48 hours, sometimes a week or so, but in a very short window of time, it devalues to such a degree by 50% sometimes. So it becomes every 24 hours, it's worth 50% less, 50% less. And so this is what's coming. There's a prophetic word that's out there several years ago about the $50 bill and the US dollar bill, but basically the $50 bill would be, a third would be cut off of it. And then another third will be cut off of it, and then ultimately it will be worthless. And so what God was saying in that prophecy is it's based on a 50-year jubilee because it's a $50 bill. The dollar bill will most likely lose about a third. And I think from what I recall, Jim, who you mentioned earlier, Jim, but this is Jim Sinclair. He actually stated, and I heard him on the record actually stating a few years ago when he was on with Greg Hunter, he said the dollar will likely lose about a third of its value overnight. And that would be a man-made event or kind of structured by man, or man would be involved in that equation. And then there would be roughly another one-third haircut years later. And that haircut, the one-third haircut, would be an act of God, or by the hand of God. And then ultimately, after that event, a little bit left after that, and then it would peter off to zero and worthless. So they would go worth less, and then worthless. Expand upon that those words that Jim Sinclair spoke about, if you recall the one-third.
Yeah, I had many conversations with him on this. Basically, he thought that there was going to be two resets. The first one would be man-made. And over time, as we got more and more toward the digital currencies, or talk of the digital currencies, the first event would be a man-made event, and they would bring forth the digital currency. Now, would they still call it the dollar? I don't, nobody knows. But that first man-made event, whether it be false flag or financial collapse related, they would introduce the digital currency. Then there would be a second reset, if you want to call it a Mother Nature reset or God's reset. That's where assets across the globe would find their true clearing prices. In other words, all these derivatives outstanding, which is the bulk of the 2 quadrillion that you were talking about earlier, all of these derivatives are going to go away because they're contracts that can't perform, and the value of a contract that can't perform is zero. So we would get a Mother Nature reset where all assets would clear and no longer be fettered by COMEX derivatives, LBMA derivatives, et cetera, et cetera. And because, not because, but if the second reset has a fiat currency factor to it, that's how you go to zero, because all fiat currencies ultimately go to zero because they're not backed by anything. They're not backed. I mean, they could say they're backed by the dollars or bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds, are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Well, what is the value of the full faith and credit of the U.S. government when, from a mathematical standpoint, we're now increasing our debt by $1 trillion every 100 days? I mean, you're talking about the chart. We're in hockey stick land already, and we're already paying over $1 trillion per year in interest alone on the debt. Mathematically, this thing goes. It is in the process of going exponential, and as that goes exponential, the value of the dollar, the value of the treasuries that are backed by, quote, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, end up going to zero. And that's math. That's not my opinion.
I just want you to see this because this was just posted a couple days ago, Bill. This is Forbes magazine. The U.S. dollar collapse. Bank of America issues shocking 1 trillion every 100 days. This is now posted. What you just stated is posted in Forbes magazine. Warning amid huge Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP crypto price boom to rival gold. Now that's kind of a joke when they say to rival gold because they've got such clamps on precious metals that it's a joke. You know, you're talking, this is kind of funny how they twist and play on words. Bitcoin, as we speak, I think last check is like 65,000-ish. Gold's 2,000. How is that rivaling gold? You see what I'm saying is they lie through their teeth. And what did we just see the other day? What did we just see? We saw all these massive billionaires sold from what they wanted to report $9 billion worth of their stocks. But the crazy part is they don't announce what they end up buying with it. So you've got the guy from Twitter, Facebook, Walmart family. These people have sold 9 billion. Maybe it's 11 now. Could be 20, 30 billion. We don't know. But they sold it from the article that was posted on a Monday, this past Monday. It was posted on the 26th February. On the 23rd, 24th, they end up by the 23rd, they sold all of their positions, and we saw Bitcoin jump in price 13 to 15, 17, whatever $1,000 now in a matter of 1 week. You see, so they tell you they sell their stocks, but then secretly, Bill, what do you think they're buying? Maybe gold, maybe silver, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies. You see, look what's going on. Look at what these people do. They create money out of thin air. They've got this is the club, and expand upon this, but it's the club. They got the secret handshake, and 45 wasn't in the club, and they hate him. But these people all know what's going on behind the scenes. Expand on that.
Well, first off, they do report what they're selling because they're insiders. And by laws that were written at a time when there was a rule of law in the United States, the laws say that they have to report what they sell if they're an insider. They don't have to report what they buy. So, I mean, they're not breaking the law. They're not doing anything shady.
Of course.
But the fact that they are selling tells you that they believe there's a better place for their capital. And as for that article, the article, when they say Bitcoin, it's and the other cryptocurrencies rivaling gold. That's a pump piece, if you will. Uh, it's a propaganda piece to get people to buy uh, cryptocurrencies rather than gold or silver. And in my opinion,
Exactly.
that's what cryptocurrencies are. In my opinion, and to this point, I look like I'm wrong because I mean I don't own Bitcoin, and I've said all along I believe Bitcoin, other cryptos are basically digital air, and we'll find out when this system breaks whether they're real or whether they're not real. It's my opinion that they were a pressure release, if you will, as an alternative to the dollar, and that veered capital away from gold and veered capital away from silver. If you want to call them the GLD and SLV ETFs on steroids, that's what they are because they're a pressure release on uh, people trying to get out of currency and basically bet against currency. That's what the ETFs were created for, and it took a lot of demand away from the physical metal. And of course, you've seen the same thing with the cryptos. When all of a sudden said and done, I think we're going to find out that there's huge leverage in the system, but there is huge leverage both ways in the system, both long, supporting stocks, supporting bonds, supporting currencies, and also huge leverage suppressing gold, silver, other commodities, because when you look at commodities, they're priced in the currencies. And if all of a sudden you've got oil at $200 or gold at 10,000, silver at $500, that is marketplace proof that the currencies are failing. So you have this debt that's on top of and suppressing the prices of real assets. When the system does fail and debt credit becomes either very difficult or even unavailable, then that's where we get the clearing prices. You'll get real prices. You'll find out within a short period of time what things are really worth and whether they're worth anything.
Completely agree. I would say this to even add to what you said. You see, when the US dollar was created, until Nixon took it off the gold standard, at least when we can agree upon this, that there was some relationship to gold, to honest ledger. You see, so that's the point of this understanding. Even if gold has a 1%, even a 1% relationship value to the US dollar, then at least they can't make it up out of thin air and they wouldn't be able to get into the quadrillions. You see, but because there's not even a 1% relationship, they can make it to infinity, and that's what they've been doing. Now, for the same thing, I look at cryptocurrencies along a similar line. You see, right now, and I fully agree with you, it's a pressure release valve. Because if there were no cryptocurrencies, all the money would be flooding into gold and silver, and they would have a lot more challenging work on their hands to try to, control, meaning manipulate, the prices downwards. And so because you have large amounts of money, like in this case, potentially billions of dollars that just happened last week, instead of all of it finding its way into precious metals, maybe a piece of the pie did. But I would say a majority of the pie went into cryptocurrencies. And like you said, 100% agreement, pressure release valve for precious metals. And so they can distract and have the money instead of it all going down one pipeline. There's a fork in the road, and one fork's taking most of the money. And I would fully agree with that. But then let's continue on further. I would further read what you also said, because ultimately cryptocurrencies, you see, the last thing, which, God revealed to me something really interesting. The last piece of paper that Obama signed before he left office, you know what it was? He turned over the internet to the United Nations. Which means what? they ultimately have the final say on the internet. So you want to pull the plug on the internet, guess who has the pulse, guess who can press the red button. And ultimately, it's like when Nixon took us off the gold standard, the money became, I could say, you want to use the word satanic, demonic, because basically it had no relationship. So it basically, when you come off the gold standard, it becomes man's money, not God's money anymore. And so same thing with cryptocurrency. At some point, when cryptocurrencies ultimately, when this beast system truly does rise, this written revelation, okay, people might be bajillionaires. I like using that word because we really don't know how much money that is, but it's a lot of money, right? So people can have a lot of money, a lot of wealth, but they're going to need to sell their soul. They're going to need to actually be a part of the system. And the system is all internet based. It's all digital. And so, yes, ultimately, just like from the day they took gold off the dollar off the gold standard, at some point when this beast system rises, you don't want to have any part of digital currencies. And I fully agree. And what a beautiful way of just stating it, how you said it's a pressure release valve, because I fully agree with you.
Yeah, I do want to add to that, just so that your listeners, I'm sure a lot of them do understand this and do know this, but some probably don't. Uh, the dollar itself is or originally was a derivative of gold and silver. The definition of a dollar, I think, is 371 and a quarter grains of silver. That is the definition of a dollar. Um, for what, 150 years, you could go into a bank with a dollar with $20.67, and you could exchange that for an ounce of gold. Or conversely, you could go in with an ounce of gold and walk out of the bank with $20.67. Then they called the gold in 1933, and 6 months later, they revalued gold to $35 an ounce. That did two things. Uh, Obviously, it took gold away from the population because it became illegal to own, but it also allowed uh, it gave the Treasury itself room to expand their balance sheet because their main asset, gold, expanded from $20.67 to $35. So they devalued by 70%. And what that did was uh, it aided the Treasury, it aided the US government in reflating a system that had a deflation problem.
Also, wasn't it at that time somewhere where France started calling him on it because they saw that they started creating all this money? So France started coming in and giving us our money back, and they were buying up all the gold. Is that a kind of true, or maybe expand upon that?
That was true, but in a different time frame. That's to Nixon taking us off the gold standard because the Gaul kept presenting $35, saying, give me 1 ounce. They were sending millions of dollars back to the US and saying, we want gold for it. So that was the reason that Nixon was forced to take us off the gold standard, because our reserves, which at one point were 20,000 tons, and they had dwindled down to 8,300 tons. So that's when they shut the window, and that was August 15th, 1971.
It's amazing how we watch all of this manifest in our lifetime. Like we started this podcast off, and I said, "How are you doing?" I said, "He goes, I'm doing great, but the world isn't." and it's true. It's true. Expand upon that. What do you see from a financials perspective? How do you see this next maybe few weeks, few months, maybe next year to two going down in terms of what you might, see happening in the financial sector?
Rather than talk about it from a financial standpoint, I'd rather talk about it just, as a guy with common sense. What I'm seeing, and I think, many people are seeing just in the last few weeks, even, so many of the lies are starting to unravel. You've got people running away from DEI. You have people finally calling out these wokesters and saying, look, you make no sense whatsoever. we're finding, whether it be from a financial standpoint, from a rule of law standpoint, it doesn't matter. There's just so many of the lies outstanding that are melting. They've got a thread, people are pulling on it. What you're seeing is just issue after issue after issue where the narrative is unraveling. Turns out that each conspiracy, quote, theory has now turned out to be conspiracy fact. And these narratives are being debunked day after day after day, and it's happening faster and faster and faster. When you're asking about what I think over the next few months or next year or whatever, I'm already on the record saying that it's my opinion that 2024 is going to be a major, major fork in the road. And I say that because, in my opinion, I think there's less than a 50-50 chance that we actually have an election in the United States this coming November. So I just think the year 2024 is going to be a major fork in the road. You're going to have a major shift of the population as far as the way they think. You're going to have a lot of people waking up.
You know, you bring the word up, truth, and it's very clear to understand when you read scriptures. It says, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And these people, they operate in darkness. Evil operates in darkness. And so what are their deals done? Their deals are done in darkness. And so they hide everything. They work in the shadows. It's all, you know, we need to really understand. These people are evil. They work in the shadows. And their number one agenda is to enslave and control humanity. Because if you understand what Babylon is, it's a control and enslavement mechanism. And so you're right. The truths are beginning to come out now. Why? Because we are stepping into a new era, it's a new time point, it's an awakening, and all these truths are going to intervene and come upon the world. But I really feel in my heart, and you know, see what your thoughts are on this. But this is the one truth that I truly have come to realize these past 50, you know, whatever years that I've been involved in precious metals, is that gold and silver, because they are God's money. The evil, the satanic, this system that's runs the world, this world, you know, this system of smoke and mirrors will never, ever, 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 ever let gold and silver achieve true price discovery unless by a godly intervention. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here. There's going to be a moment in time where God is not, you know, because he's the way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. He's going to make a way because evil never wins. But I believe God lets evil get to the finish line, and he allows evil to actually think they win and won. And then the tables flip. So that's my take, because gold and silver, and every time I've joked about this on all these podcasts last year or two, you see silver hit $25, $26, slammed down. You see gold get up to like 2,100, they slam it down. You know, so it's got this roof on it, and they will never, ever let gold or silver achieve true price discovery in this Babylonian system. And that's why I truly believe, you know, the explosion of precious metals vertically in price is because of an act of God. And this is going to be where the truths will set us free.
Now, I've got a really short comment to make on that. God wins, and God's money, gold and silver, are the only monies on the planet that cannot default in a man-made system that is in the process of defaulting.
It was really wonderful to speak with you, and I've enjoyed listening to you over the years, and your knowledge of precious metals and the financial system is next to none. So my viewers are going to love this podcast. Incredible wisdom that you brought upon us, because ultimately, like you said, Bill, the money's a fraud. They create it out of thin air, and the only thing that stands, every single currency, you know, like I say, if you don't study history, you'll never know the future, ever. And what does history tell us? Every single money system whatever was ever created by man, every single one of them ultimately went to zero. And the US dollar is no different, right?
Yeah, I've got one more comment on that, Bo. Um, as the financial system unravels and as the dollar becomes viewed as a non-viable currency, I guess rather than a comment, I guess I'll pose it as a question. How will all of the payoffs and how will all of the bribes that pay media, pay politicians, etc., how are those going to be paid if the dollar is not acceptable? I guess what I'm getting at is when the dollar dies, God wins because the dollar has funded so much evil.
When the dollar dies, God wins and the truths come out, and there is your great awakening to the truth of all the deals done in darkness, including the wars which are funded by this military machine of petrodollar. So, wow, what an awesome and what an incredible podcast. Just such a pleasure to speak with you, Bill. And God bless you, your family, your life. And I hope to speak with you again in the not too distant future. So, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Bo. God bless you.
Beverly Hills Precious Metals Exchange is a client-focused firm devoted to assisting our clients with precious metals. Our clients range from first-time to serious coin collectors and investors seeking to add precious metals to their investment portfolios. We are not interested in volatile investments, leveraged products, and intangible assets. With rising inflation and the devaluing of the dollar hurting middle-class families, investing in gold and silver ensures protection for your hard-earned money. Save the value of your money today by investing in gold and silver at Beverly Hills Precious Metals.